What if I told you that what holds you back the most in life isn't a lack of talent, opportunity, or money, but the silent habit of waiting until you feel secure before acting? That sounds logical, almost responsible, right? But here's the paradox. Those who wait for security before acting almost never move. And those who take action create the security they were waiting for. Most people live trapped in this mistake without realizing it, believing that motivation, clarity, or courage appear before the first step, when, in fact, they are born after share. Perhaps you've already experienced this firsthand. The feeling that it's not the right time yet, that something is missing, that it's better to wait a little longer. But that a little longer turns into months, years, and life keeps demanding action. The problem isn't making mistakes. The problem is building an entire identity based on not trying. And here comes the counterintuitive statement that changes everything. Acting as if it's going to work out isn't naive optimism, it's practical intelligence. This is how the human mind learns, adapts, and begins to work in your favor. In this video, you'll understand why action comes before confidence, why the mind doesn't follow facts but conviction, and how small daily decisions are shaping, right now, the kind of life you're building. No empty, pretty phrases here. This is real human functioning, applied to real life. If you feel stagnant, stuck, or always almost starting, stick with me. Because what you're about to hear can completely change how you act from today onward. The biggest mistake: waiting for absolute certainty before acting. Have you ever noticed how your mind loves to sell you the idea of just one more sign before you even begin? First you wait for courage, then you wait for money, then you wait for the perfect moment. And before you know it, time has passed and you're stuck, like that app that never updates. And here's the curious thing. The problem is almost never a lack of ability. It's an excess of it, requirement with yourself. You demand a guarantee from yourself that even life doesn't give. And deep down, you call prudence what is often fear dressed in a suit and tie. Now think about it. If you only act when you're sure, you're telling your brain, "I'll only move when the world proves it to me." But the world doesn't work that way, does it? Life is more about show me than I'll show you. You don't gain confidence before you take the step. You earn confidence. Because, from there, the cycle that traps millions happens. The more you wait to feel ready, the less capable you prove yourself. And the less capable you prove yourself, the less ready you feel. It's a trap, plain and simple. So instead of asking, "What if it goes wrong?" change the question to one that puts you in the driver's seat. How do I make it work in the way I can, with what I have? In practice, want to start a project? Define a 15-minute micro-step, today. Want to improve your life? Make that call you've been avoiding. Want to study? Open the content and watch 10 minutes, even if you don't feel like it. Motivation comes later, not before. And the funniest thing is that when you act small, your mind stops sabotaging you big. But there's a detail that almost nobody notices. The mind does not obey facts, it obeys conviction. And that changes everything in the next topic. The mind doesn't follow facts, it follows conviction. Let me tell you, something that's a game changer when you truly understand it. Your mind doesn't respond to what's real. It responds to what you accepted as internal truth. It may seem strange at first glance, but think about it. Two people experience the same crisis, in the same country, with the same difficulties, and have completely different results. It's not luck. It's a filter. The mind works like a radar. It picks up what matches the conviction you hold, even if you never say it out loud. When you believe, deep down, that this isn't for me, your decisions become defensive. You procrastinate, choose the safest path, avoid exposure, and call it caution. But when you act like someone who believes they'll figure it out, your decisions change tone. You ask how, not if. You test, adjust, learn, and move on. And the curious thing is, the more you act this way, the more your mind starts searching evidence to support that stance. It's as if it were saying, okay, since you're behaving like this, let me help. In practice, this is visible in simple things. When you enter a conversation believing you have something to contribute, your posture changes, your voice changes, your choices change. People feel this, even without being able to explain it. And when you enter expecting rejection, the world usually confirms that expectation, not because it conspires against you, but because you've taught it how you want to be treated. And this is where a silent shift begins. Because conviction isn't what you feel, it's what you do. He does, and that brings us straight to the next point. Conviction is not a feeling, it's behavior. Here's a truth that few people accept, but that completely changes the way you live. Conviction isn't that nice feeling that appears when everything is going well. Conviction is what you do when there's no audience, when there's no guarantee, and when there's still no reward. It's about waking up early even when you don't feel like it, maintaining your standards even when no one is watching, and continuing to walk when your mind starts negotiating, giving up. Feelings fluctuate. Behavior builds identity. Notice how many people confuse enthusiasm with conviction. They start something excitedly, tell everyone, plan, write it down. Then the first obstacle appears and just like that, they freeze. Not because the goal was wrong, but because their identity wasn't yet firm. The mind looks at the interrupted action and concludes, "See, you're not that kind of person." And each time this repeats, the doubt becomes more comfortable, more familiar, almost like home. But the opposite is also true, and almost no one explores this. When you act despite doubt, even on a small scale, something profound happens. Your mind receives concrete evidence. I act even when afraid. And that evidence weighs more than 1,000 motivational phrases. Want practical examples? Sticking to a schedule you promised yourself. Finishing a task before resting. Studying for 20 minutes a day on a topic that can improve your income. Reading 10 pages of a book like Think and Grow Richer, The Power of the Subconscious Mind, and apply an idea on the same day. Each of these actions teaches your mind to trust you, and when the mind trusts, it stops sabotaging. But this triggers an even greater effect, which appears in the next topic. Action creates identity, and identity drives results. Everything starts to change when you understand that it's not the results that build who you are. It's the repeated actions. Every step, however small it may seem, sends a silent message to the brain. I am someone who acts. And that message is worth more than any internal promise. Gradually, the identity adjusts. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries and start seeing yourself as someone who builds. That's the shift. Do you see how this works in everyday life? When you decide to act like an organized person, you don't wait for the house to be perfect to start. You start by organizing one drawer. When you act like someone who is growing financially, you don't wait to earn more to learn. You study now, write down expenses, make a difficult phone call, learn about a simple asset. It could be reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad to change the perspective on money, or The Richest Man in Babylon to learn basic principles. Identity changes first, money follows later. And here's the subtle point. The world reacts to the identity you silently uphold. People start listening to you more attentively. Opportunities appear with less resistance. Decisions become more strategic and less defensive. It's not magic, it's consistency. Your mind starts looking for solutions, not excuses. But there's an area where this dynamic becomes even more evident, especially when the subject is money and fear. And that's exactly what we need to unpack in the next section. Financial fear isn't about money, it's about inadequacy. Now, pay attention to this point because it often hurts, but it liberates. Financial fear rarely stems from a lack of money itself. It arises from silent doubt. What if I'm not able to recover? It's not about losing, it's about not trusting yourself after the loss. When that fear takes control, your decisions become small, defensive, focused only on surviving. And surviving never builds anything great. It's playing not to lose, when the game demands playing to win. Notice how this manifests in everyday life. You avoid a difficult conversation about price. You avoid learning something new because now is not the time. You back away from an opportunity because it seems too risky. And you call this prudence. But over time, this prudence exacts a high interest rate. Stagnation. The cycle becomes clear. Little risk, little learning, little result, more fear. And the more this pattern repeats itself, the more the mind confirms. See, it was dangerous after all. But nobody grows without going through this initial discomfort. Acting as if everything will work out isn't being irresponsible. It's stopping treating every decision as a judgment about its worth. In practice, this means making mistakes without destroying yourself, learning without humiliating yourself, adjusting without giving up. Want a simple example? Setting aside a small amount of money to learn something that can increase your income. Studying a practical topic for 30 minutes a day. Making a decision you've been putting off for weeks. Each of these actions teaches your mind to trust you. And when the mind trusts, it cooperates. But this cooperation doesn't happen on its own. It needs consistency. And that's exactly where many people slip up. Which leads to the next point. Consistency beats enthusiasm and educates the mind. Here's something almost no one wants to hear. Enthusiasm is noisy, but consistency is silent and much more powerful. The mind learns through repetition, not through excitement. When you act one day yes and 3 days no, it understands that it's optional. But when you act even without the will, even when tired, even without immediate results, the message changes. This is who I am. And that message goes deep, really deep. Think about how many things you've started full of energy and abandoned at the first sign of friction. It wasn't a lack of talent, it was a lack of continuity. Clarity doesn't come before movement. It comes later. After it is by walking that the path unfolds. It is by studying that understanding appears. It is by doing that confidence is born. Those who wait to feel ready never begin. Those who begin, even imperfectly, end up becoming ready along the way. In practice, consistency means deciding on a non-negotiable minimum standard. Read 10 pages a day. Study for 20 minutes, no matter what. Take one concrete step each day towards what you want to build. It could be writing a page, recording a video, learning something new, improving a skill. It's not about intensity, it's about frequency. And when this pattern is maintained, something curious happens. Your mind stops arguing and starts collaborating. But there's one last point that ties it all together and transforms action into self-respect. Act like someone who respects themselves. The world responds. There is a silent dividing line between those who move forward and those who remain in circles. Self-respect in the form of action. Acting as if everything will work out is, deep down, acting like someone who takes themselves seriously. It's not arrogance. It's not posing. It's not a pretty speech. It's an inner attitude. It's stopping asking permission to exist, grow, and occupy space. And the curious thing is that the world notices this even before you consciously realize it. Notice how people react differently when you stand by your decisions, even uncomfortable ones. When you don't over-explain. When you don't back down at the first sign of friction. When you take a calm stance, without aggression, but without hesitation. This changes conversations, changes negotiations, changes opportunities. Not because you've become superior, but because you've started behaving like someone who expects to be treated seriously. The world quickly learns how to deal with you. And here's a delicate point. Every time you accept less than your worth, every time you diminish yourself to avoid conflict, every time you postpone what you know needs to be done, you're training the world to give you crumbs. Not out of malice, but out of consistency. Life responds to behavior, not intention. And when you change your behavior, even before any external proof, reality begins to reorganize itself around that. But sustaining this posture requires something even deeper. Something that defines who continues when no one is applauding. And that's what appears in the next topic. The silent decision that changes everything. There comes a point when nothing external changes, but something internal decides. It's not an announcement, it's not a loud promise, it's not an inspirational post, it's a silent decision. I'm no longer going to act like someone who doubts themselves. This decision doesn't make a sound, but it completely changes the way you walk, talk, choose, and react. And little by little, the world begins to respond to this new frequency, even without knowing why. Notice how this shows up in the details. You stop constantly seeking validation. You stop over-explaining your plans. You stop negotiating with your own procrastination. Instead, you act. Not because you're absolutely certain, but because you trust that you'll adapt along the way. And this practical, not emotional, confidence is what differentiates those who build from those who merely consume beautiful ideas. The mind believes in what you do, not in what you promise. In practice, this decision emerges when you get up and take the next possible step, even a small one. When you don't wait for the ideal scenario. When you understand that security is not a prerequisite for action, it is a result. Each movement reinforces internally. I can handle this. And when this message is repeated, the mind stops sabotaging itself and begins to cooperate. This is where the improbable begins to seem possible. And this opens up space for something even greater, which connects everything you've heard so far. When the mind cooperates, the impossible loses its power. There's an almost invisible point where everything starts to unlock. When your mind stops fighting against you. Until then, every decision seemed burdensome. Every step was accompanied by doubt. Every mistake sounded like proof of inadequacy. But when you repeatedly act like someone who trusts in their own adaptation, something changes inside. The mind understands the message. Okay, he's not running away. And from then on, it starts looking for solutions instead of excuses. Notice how this changes your perception of the world. What once seemed like a blockage becomes an adjustment. What seemed like failure becomes learning. What seemed impossible becomes merely improbable. And the improbable, when you persist, usually yields. Not because the universe has become more generous, but because you've stopped wasting energy defending yourself against fear. Your attention becomes clearer, your choices more strategic, your emotions more stable. You're no longer fighting yourself. In practice, this manifests itself when you make mistakes and don't panic. When something doesn't work out, and you adjust instead of giving up. When an opportunity demands responsibility, and you don't automatically back down. Each mature response reinforces internally. I know how to handle this. And when this confidence accumulates, the impossible begins to lose its power, not all at once, but step by step. But all of this still depends on one final element, something that separates those who transform knowledge into real life from those who merely watch. And that's exactly what comes next. Consistent action builds respect, both internally and externally. There comes a point where it's no longer about technique, strategy, or new knowledge. It's about who you become when you act consistently. Each sustained step builds something invisible, yet powerful: self-respect. And when you respect yourself, your decisions change. You stop choosing what's comfortable and start choosing what's consistent with who you want to be. This doesn't make a sound, but it changes everything. Notice how, over time, the way you are treated begins to reflect this movement. People start to trust you more, listen more, take you more seriously. Not because you asked for it, but because your behavior has repeatedly communicated it. Life tests those who are resilient less, and when it does test, it finds someone who doesn't crumble. This stability doesn't come from external certainties. It comes from the continuous practice of acting even without guarantees. In practice, this appears when you maintain the standard even when no one is watching, when you fulfill what you promised yourself, when you act the same way on good days and bad days. This consistency educates your mind and signals to the world who you are. And when identity and action finally align, you enter a different territory. A territory where learning, adjusting, and moving forward becomes natural. It is precisely from here that everything you have heard begins to integrate. And now it makes sense to prepare the ground for the introduction that ties it all together from the beginning. Now let me ask you some direct questions, the kind that don't require an open-mouthed answer, but demand honesty. If someone were to observe only your actions over the past few months, without hearing your intentions, your plans, or your justifications, would that person say you are building something or just preparing to build something? Would they say you trust yourself, or that you are still waiting for permission, validation, or an ideal scenario that may never arrive? Everything you've heard so far converges on one simple yet powerful point. Action is not a consequence of trust. Action is its source. Every step you take, even a small one, is teaching your mind to trust you. Every step you avoid is reinforcing doubt. So the question that really matters now isn't, what if it goes wrong? But rather, what is the next move I can make today? Even though I'm afraid, even though I'm not sure. Not tomorrow. Not when everything is aligned. Today. And here's the final invitation. Choose just one thing. Small, concrete, real, and act like someone who believes they'll find a way. Observe what changes in you. Observe how your mind responds. Observe how the world begins to react differently when you stop hiding behind waiting. Because, in the end, life doesn't reward those who understand. It rewards those who practice. If this content resonated with you, if at any point it felt like it was speaking directly to your story, then don't let it die here. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep walking with us. Each video is another step in this inner journey that no one can take away from you. Now tell me, what action will you take today?